To Sir Sammy Paringgit and to all BPED 2F, good day. My name is Mayan Pabrea and my co-members are Therese Marie Mahinay, Dan Leo Rivera, Fai Hasim, Nuriel Resurrection, and Renz Eugene Uru. Today we are going to report to you the lesson 6, which is the types of motor skill practice.
What is practice?
Practice is the active process of attempting to perform a task, and it leads to the acquisition of skill. In order to be effective, practice trials usually needs to be repeated many times. We know that to gain expertise, a skill must be rehearsed repeatedly. However, there are many variables to consider when structuring the way practice should ensure, including the amount, the type, and the schedule. As presented above, the best practice design should not simply promote immediate performance effect, but ensure long-term learning by promoting retention and transfer of skill. During practice, not all of the attempt and combinations of movements are successful, but each attempt provides the child with information about what to do and what not to do in order to achieve the goal. It is well supported that the best way to improve at any skill is to practice, practice, and do more practice. The more time devoted on task, the more opportunity an individual has to improve their capabilities.
And now let's go to the types of motor skill practice.
Good morning, sir. My name is Danleo Rivera. Now I'll be reporting about practice variability. Variability refers to the variety of movement and context characteristics the learners experiences while practicing a skills. Movements and experience and context characteristic that can be varied in practice. Skill variations that will be required in test conditions. Physical context in which the skills is performed. Situation in which the skills occurs. There is two types of variability. Number one, interest skills. Practicing variation of the same skills. It improves adaptability of the skill, which means there are practice with the same skills, like we're doing practicing volleyball and do keep and practice so that they adapt the ability to in spiking, diggings, receiving, serving, blocking, or setting. The number two, inter skills. Inter skills is practicing different skills together, improve learning through increase the cognitive effort. Which means practicing different skills together, it's the capability of the athletes to improve their skills, and not only skills but knowledge how to perform well the sport, or the, like, let's say dance sport. They have the different steps, action, and they have different types of genre in case of dancing, which is we must learn how the proper execution, the proper training, so that we can apply to ourselves as a dancer. That's all, sir. Thank you and good morning.
Good day, sir. Good day, classmate. My name is Renz Eugene C. Uro, and I will discuss about the practice distribution. The practice distribution problem. Have a specific amount of tin to practice or rehab for future tests. Teen to practice rehab means are the process of helping someone to lead a normal life again after they have been ill or when they have had drug or alcoholic problem. And the best way to schedule the available time in terms of the length and frequency of the practice sessions. The length practice sessions, a period of training that takes place over a set period of time. For example, an hour or several hours. The frequency of practice session, a particular data is the number of times the data value occurs. Example, if 5 students got an A in science and then the grade A is set to have a frequency of 5. The length of rest intervals between trials during each practice session is some of the muscle building. Muscle building, it is recommended to take 30 to 90 seconds. Rest intervals in between sets, 2 to 5 minutes rest interval is suggested for strength and power exercises. For endurance, the best interval is 30 seconds or less. Mass and distributed practice. Mass practice involves a continuous practice session, with the rest intervals being shorter than the practice intervals. For example, a gymnast learning a handstand drilling continues until fatigue makes further practice or limited benefit. And another example of mass practice describes studying conducted less frequently and for longer periods of time, such as cramming for an examination on the night before the assessment. In the distributed space, practice involves a broken practice session with the intervals of rest or alternative activities being longer than the practice. Distributed practice means a learning techniques where practice occurs in multiple short sessions, hour, a long period of time, with an acceptable amount of space in between each session. That's all. Thank you.
Hello everyone, this is Hasim Al-Faizer B, and I am the one who was assigned to give some thought the letter C, which is the whole and part practice. So when we talk about a whole and part practice, it is a thorough understanding of a movement, determines whether a motor task should be practiced in its entirety or whole, or broken down into separate parts or a part. Artificially dividing a task that does not lend itself to part practice may not benefit or even hinder motor learning. Also, more practice is better, but it is unclear how practice session should be structured. Should a large amount of practice be done all at once or mass, or should rest breaks be scattered throughout, distributed? Should only one task or constant be practiced, or should different tasks or variation of the single task be introduced or variable?
Good day, Sir Sammy Paringue Jr. Good day, classmates. I am Noriel D. Resurrections. Today, I am going to continue to discuss about the whole and part practicing. The concept of mass and distributed practice define different ways the practice can be undertaken. For example, if you want to work with Joan on left-hand control, you may decide to perform 30 trials of inserting a key into a lock and turning during a treatment session. But should Joan practice all 30 trials at once? Mass practice requires all trials to be performed into a manner that minimizes the amount of rest between trials, so there is more time on task than there is spent during rest. Distributed practice divides repetitions into smaller chunks to allow for rest between trials. 5 trials now in 5 in 10 minutes and etc. Clinically, there is no empirical evidence to support that either of these schedules lead to superior motor skills learning. However, depending on the goal of the practice sessions and the individual's capabilities, strengths, endurance, cognition, ability to focus on tasks, incorporating either a mass or distributed schedule may lead to better learning and should be taken into account when designing a treatment interventions. So our thoughts about that is to each learning sessions must focus on the same subject.
A good day to you, Sir Sammy. I am Therese Marie M. Mahinay from BPED 2F. So to summarize the whole topic of Lesson 6, why is it important to practice motor skills? So, they help us move and do everything from lifting heavy items to typing on a keyboard. Motor skills and motor control begin developing after birth and will progress as children grow. Having good motor control also helps children explore the world around them, which can help with many other areas of development. Practice is the active process of attempting to perform a task, and it leads to the acquisition of skill. In order to be effective, practice trials usually need to be repeated many times. It is important to note that the process of problem solving needs to be repeated for effective learning, rather than simply the repetition of a movement. There are many practice variables that affect learning, such as the amount of practice, practice scheduling, and variations in the task and context of practice. Factors affecting motor learning in this population include the inability to practice many motor skills without assistance or physical support, and slower rates of learning. Common sense would suggest that increased practice of a task would enhance learning and skill acquisition in that task. One's practice variable dwarfs all the others in terms of importance, and it is so obvious that it need hardly be mentioned at all. Practice clearly. More learning will occur if there are more practice trials. All other things being equal, perhaps we do not need to say any more about the amount of practice than this in structuring the practice session. The number of practice attempts should be maximized. So it is probable that some of the failure of rehabilitation is due to the little time actually being spent in practicing motor tasks using guidelines provided by the therapist. While practice is essential for motor learning and the development of motor programs, in general, increased practice leads to increased learning. Learning is directly determined by the amount of practice. So that's all for our report on Lesson 6, the types of motor skills and practice.